right. Welcome back to the Command Your Brand Show. I am your host, Josh Silvestro, brand ambassador of Command Your Brand. So in this episode, I actually have a very special guest here. He is actually just kind of what's interesting is for those of people who know me, I'm very into the technology space and love to learn a little bit about technology. He's actually have a lot of experience in the technology space. In a previous time period, he's a physicist. And he's an author, speaker, and he's actually the author of a book called Doomed to Fail. So I'd like to introduce you guys to Paul. So Paul, thanks for joining the show, man.
Thank you very much, Josh. The pleasure is mine.
Yeah. So I guess what we'll first start off is, Paul, so would you mind just, for my audience here, because some people don't know who you are, would you mind just telling us a bit about yourself and I guess your background and like how you got into what you do today?
Of course. So I'm English by birth, and I was trained at Oxford University as a physicist. That's where I did my undergraduate degree, my PhD. And then I went to work at CERN, the high energy physics, the particle accelerator laboratory in Switzerland, intending to be an academic. But having done research for about 5 years, I came to realize that's not really what I wanted to do. And so I made a switch to Wall Street. I went to work for Goldman Sachs in London as a trader, and then enjoyed a career in financial markets of 30 years as a trader and as a risk manager and as a quant in risk management, working for investment banks.
Wow. And I guess what made you want to go into that field, just out of curiosity?
Well, the reason I made the transition, Goldman was interested in somebody who was highly quantitative, who could write computer algorithms to value complex structured products. This was the late 1980s. This was the very early days of financial engineering and derivatives. And these products weren't well understood at the time, but a lot of exotic products embedded within Eurobonds, the center of which was London. So they wanted a quant to be a trader on the desk, but who could knock up valuation algorithms and hedging algorithms for these structured products. And so that's how I made the transition, because when I was working at CERN, computer programming was a big part of my job there. So that's how I made the transition. And I have to say, I never look back. I don't regret this time I spent doing physics research, but equally, I thoroughly enjoyed my time at Goldman. It was a fascinating time in financial markets. So there's been big bang deregulation in the city of London, and it was a very exciting new place. Ostensibly, I was a bond trader, but the reality is I was trading all kinds of different things, lots of different structures embedded within these bonds, supermarket properties in Australia in one case, embedded options on gold and other commodities, foreign exchange, equities, equity warrants, bond warrants. All of this stuff was very new at that time. Very, very few people knew how to value it or understand it. So it was a fascinating time for me to learn all about that.
Wow. And I guess were you able to learn all that? Because I know it's like I guess maybe in that time period wasn't as big a field as it is today, but how did you study and learn about that stuff?
At that time, it was all learning on the desk. I mean, I was a trader for about 9 years before moving to risk management. But at that time, risk management didn't exist as a discipline. It was something that me and my colleagues created a lot of that stuff. So the early stuff on value at risk and expected shortfall and then stress testing. I was one of the pioneers who helped develop a lot of that technology. Nowadays there are MBA courses on risk management, and it's taught in universities. But at that time, it didn't exist. We were literally creating and inventing this stuff as we went along. It was a really fascinating time.
Yeah. Do you find it that programs and all the things that you've learned, has it changed over from when you first started to where it is now?
Well, yes. I mean, I think things have, this has become established disciplines. Market risk management, model risk is now, since the financial crisis 16 years ago, the Federal Reserve required banks to treat model risk as a risk type in its own right. So there's much more discipline and structure around the whole enterprise of risk management now than there was then, and the whole formalization of the traders being now regarded as the first line of defense, then the independent oversight function, which didn't exist when I started out in the business at all. I started at Goldman when it was a private partnership, and the partners were risk management because they were totally exposed to the total value of their net worth. Had the company gone down, the partners personally would have been bankrupt. So that concentrated their minds wonderfully, and they provided risk management. It was only much later that it became established as a discipline, and the central banks, the bank regulators like the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and so on, required banks to have independent oversight functions, and the whole process became much more formalized. That's all been developed in the course of my career over the last 30 years or so.
Wow. It seems like it's really intense. Like, it seems like it got really stressful. I don't know if it's like this today, but I know like over time, especially in the beginning, it was very stressful, and it kind of got into like a zone of like, there's so much of it that's like almost impossible to kind of understand everything, and just it's a whole subject to grasp a bit.
It was, it was very stressful, but it was fascinating. I absolutely loved being part of it. I mean, the hours were long. I would be into the office by 6:30 in the morning, and I typically wouldn't leave until 8 at night. The weekends, you didn't get out of bed until midday on the Saturday, and then 9 o'clock Sunday night, you were back in bed again. So it was very long hours, very stressful. But for those people who could survive that and, in fact, thrive on it, it was a fascinating time. And of course, the financial rewards were very great.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so do you think that, because I know you're kind of into the investing and trading a bit, right?
Yes. Yeah. Now, I mean, I retired from my executive career as an investment banker about 5 years ago or so. Right. And now I have a small portfolio of venture capital businesses, and I serve on the boards of several companies. Interestingly, they're all science and tech related companies. So even though I've not been a practicing physicist for more than 30 years, the interest in me for joining a board, providing consultancy advisory services, has been much more to do with my science background than it has been to do with my finance background, because, of course, finance people on a relative basis are 10 a penny, whereas physicists are much, much rarer, and certainly physicists with their expertise in finance are quite rare beasts. So that's where most of the interest has come from. So I'm engaged in businesses with things to do with artificial intelligence, cybersecurity,
wow.
Rhamnoblipid biosurfactants is one, aerospace technology is one, natural botanical medications is another. That's a particular interest to me, because since I was a small boy, my passion outside of my professional activities is gardening. So things to do with the natural world and growing plants that's a great interest to me. But all of these businesses that I'm engaged in, I mean, there's another one. I'm chairman of the board of a company based in the United Kingdom, which deals with mental health care, which is a particular problem in the UK and in the United States these days. So many young people are suffering from mental health problems. But all of these businesses that I'm engaged in, they combine a deep knowledge and understanding of science and technology together with my experience as a finance person, and use my network to raise money. Often these businesses need to raise money, as well as needing governance and oversight. So that's the kind of thing that I provide for the companies that I work with now.
That's very cool. I know a lot of people who, I've talking to a lot of doctors and a lot of people who they're CEOs and founders for other companies. And, one of the biggest thing is that, they're trying to now adapt this like AI, and how do I use AI in my business, and like, how do I use it to make myself money? Like, what do you think about all that?
Oh, AI is an incredibly powerful tool. One of the businesses that I'm engaged in is using artificial intelligence to identify pathogens. There are a lot of diseases. Diseases of cattle, for example, dairy cattle or beef cattle, and there's a name given to a class of diseases, but the actual underlying pathogen could be quite different. The same kind of symptoms may be created either by a bacterial pathogen, or sometimes by a viral pathogen, or sometimes by a fungus. And so knowing and being able to identify what the actually underlying vector, what the underlying pathogen is, enables you to give the proper treatment. There's no point in treating a viral infection with antibiotics. That's one of the big problems in the dairy industry, the last 20 or 30 years or so, is the indiscriminate use of antibiotics to treat diseases which are actually caused by viruses. The antibiotics are completely useless. They're only useful for killing bacterial diseases, and that's given rise to a big problem in antibiotic resistance because of the overuse of antibiotics to treat the wrong kind of disease. So now you can use artificial intelligence to identify specifically what the pathogen is. Now you can give the proper treatment, and you can give the proper amount, enough to kill the disease, whatever's causing it. There are enough to kill it, but not so much as to be wasteful or damaging for the environment. So that's one of the businesses that I'm engaged in, which uses artificial intelligence. But clearly, there are a great many. It's one of the most powerful tools available. I've got very, very high expectations of what AI will be able to deliver in the coming years.
Yeah, I think it's such a good tool because you use it for even for us, we use it for like all of our clients, and we help them, get onto podcasts, and we have a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of their businesses, they use that. Do you find that sometimes AI I find it sometimes with my messaging where like it'll spit out something wrong and like you have to kind of correct it a few times?
That can always happen. But I mean, AI is just a tool, but and it's capable of being misused, and obviously a lot of people are very much afraid about that. But I say to people, well, even the kitchen knife that you use to prepare vegetables and meat to make dinner for your family, that kitchen knife could also be used to slit somebody's throat or to stab them. So what are we going to do? We're going to ban kitchen knives? No, really not. The point is you ban the bad act, you don't ban the tool. And so, of course, artificial intelligence is capable of being misused by bad actors, and we should not want that to happen. But we should not ignore the tremendous power that AI has. We should use it as a useful tool and regulate, prevent the misuse of the tool and the bad actions.
Right. So do you think it's something we should like you mentioned, it was a tool, not just like something we should just always rely on in terms of like everything that we do, right? So I guess like how would you know in terms of using the devices or things that you're trying to use for your business? How do you know if it's workable or not? Do you have to just try it out?
It's that's one of the difficulties of the model risk associated with using AI models. It's often not clear how they've come up with the decisions, with the recommendations, the answers that they come up with, and there are well-known problems of hallucinations where they invent incorrect answers.
Yeah.
But I would say, well, so do people, and you look for what you're comparing artificial intelligence to. Human intelligence used to various things is not perfect either. And artificial intelligence, certainly anything related to pattern recognition, which is one of the most powerful tools. And the example I gave earlier about identifying the pathogens, that's all about pattern recognition. And AI is a much, much better recognizer of patterns than our humans. So you, like anything else, you put safeguards around it. You need to test, to check the outcomes to make sure that the answers that it's giving are sensible. But no more than you would do with a human person producing an answer for you.
Right. It's very fascinating because I find AI is such a useful tool, and it's like we use it now. It's like, I think, what is it, like a few years ago, we're like, oh, AI is going to like destroy the world. Like we're looking at do you ever see the movie The Terminator? It's kind of like, oh, the Terminator is going to rule the world. And it's kind of like now it's like a few years later, we're like all using it in our business, Yeah.
But the underlying technology has been around for a very long time, at least since the 1950s. And the reason why it wasn't used more widely until very recently, there are two reasons. One of the things is that it needs tremendous amount of computing power. And the second thing is it needs a tremendous amount of data. And those things simply weren't available until recently. Now we've got sensors everywhere. So there's massive amounts of data available to train the models. And computing power through the cloud is now available very cheaply. So now you've got the two things which are needed to enable people to use AI. But the underlying technology and the statistical models that it's based on, that they're very well established techniques. They've been around for a long time.
Yeah, and I think using those tools that are actually workable is definitely important, because if you don't have the right tools, then you can't get the right product that you're trying to do and get them out, right? That makes sense. So I guess I would like to also, go into your book, because I think, in your book, it would kind of interested me, which is called, the title was literally called Doomed to Fail.
Doomed to Fail, why government is incapable of living up to our hopes.
Yeah.
So the book takes ideas from my early days as a physicist The ideas of complex adaptive systems. There's a lot of research done on that in the 1980s, 1990s, especially in particle physics, the field that I was involved in.
Right.
But human society is a complex adaptive system. And there's important mathematics of these systems. They're highly nonlinear. They tend to obey power laws. They're deeply interconnected, which means classic techniques of Stoic philosophers of solving complicated problems, breaking a problem down into its component parts, getting experts to solve each of those components and then reconstitute the whole. That technique will work for problems which are complicated, provided they're linear. It will not work for complex problems because they're highly nonlinear. And then the final element is that of adaptivity, the fact that the models, the fact that society changes over time in ways that are completely unpredictable or unexpected. And you put all these elements together, that's the reason why the future is fundamentally unknowable.
Right.
And in a future which is unknowable, our leaders, our political leaders, they are bound to make mistakes. Even the smartest people around, trying to do their best, trying to do a good job, it's inevitable they will do things which later on, in the fullness of time, will turn out to have been mistakes. And society will want to get rid of those methods, those ways, and change policy. Because politicians become very associated with the policies that they espoused, we want to change the policy, we want to change the politician. And here's the beauty of democracy. The reason why democracy is the best form of political organization is that it provides a peaceful mechanism for getting rid of failed leaders and replacing them with new leaders who will go on to fail in their own way in due course, of course. But democracy is a peaceful way for society to make course corrections and project forward and improve our lives. In contrast, autocracies like Xi Jinping's China and Vladimir Putin's Russia, those leaders make mistakes every bit as much as democratic leaders make mistakes. But there's no peaceful way of getting rid of them. And so autocrats double down on their mistakes.
Right.
They find enemies within their own population, like the Uyghurs in Western China, and they penalize them as a means of drumming up support amongst the majority parts of the population. They wage war against their neighbors, as Putin is doing in Ukraine, in order to get people on side benefit from the rally around the flag effect and increase support. So autocracies are extremely dangerous bodies. They're far more likely to go to war against other people. Not to say that democracies can't go to war. Of course they can, but they're much less likely to do so, and they do so only when they are provoked. And that's why democracy is the best form of political organization, and it's the reason why we should protect our democracy. For the same reason, capitalism is the best form of economic organization, because the reality is that most businesses fail. The overwhelming majority of businesses fail within their first few years, sometimes because they're just bad ideas, sometimes they're good ideas, but the timing's not right, or they can't get the funding, or there's regulatory problems, whatever it is. But most businesses fail. And so capitalism provides a sifting, a filtering mechanism to quickly kill off the failing businesses without destroying too much capital, enabling the small number of successful businesses to propagate forward into the future, preserving enough capital to support them. In contrast, centrally planned economies like what the Soviet Union used to be and China is now, they put huge state backing, state power, state finance behind the businesses. Most of those businesses fail at the same rate, but when they fail, they destroy huge amounts of capital, and there's insufficient left to invest in what would have been the few successful businesses. And that's why capitalist economies outperform centrally planned economies over time. And so these filtering mechanisms that capitalism is in the case of business, and democracies in the way of filtering out, getting rid of bad leaders, replacing them with, hopefully better ones, allowing society to take a step forward. This is very similar to Darwinian evolution. It's a very similar kind of mechanism of, in a changing environment, you have organisms which are capable of changing both through having sex and giving rise to a new genetic structure in the offspring, plus the fact that there are failures in DNA replication from one generation to the next, that allows changes, and those changes allow those organisms which are most successful in a new adapting environment, it allows those to propagate forward. That's the underlying element behind Darwinian evolution. And it's the same winnowing mechanism, filtering mechanism to filter out those things which can be successful in the future. So it's a very powerful technique. Yeah. And so I say democracy, capitalism, very important, very powerful things which need to be defended. And yet today there's been a massive loss of faith in democracy and capitalism to deliver fair outcomes for people. And there's never just one reason why that is. There are always several reasons. Part of it is globalization and the hollowing out of the middle classes as jobs got shipped off to low-cost centers in China and India and other parts of Southeast Asia. So that's part of it. But a big part of it as well is the global financial crisis of 16 years ago. So in the second half of my book, I talk about what caused the global financial crisis. And that was caused by, inadvertently, not deliberately, but it was caused by mismanagement of monetary policy by the Federal Reserve and the world's other central banks, the Bank of England in the United Kingdom and the European Central Bank in Europe. But the Federal Reserve is the most important central bank in the world, so it is the leader. So mismanagement of monetary policy since at least the days of Alan Greenspan in 1987. And that gave rise to the crisis, the misregulation of the banks, mistaken, poorly thought out methods of regulating the banks. That's why the global financial crisis is as bad as it was. And we didn't really learn anything. The central bankers, bank regulators didn't really learn anything from that crisis because the new regulations that were put in place afterwards, we led to the mini crisis early last year, the Silicon Valley Bank, the failure of Credit Suisse, and so on. So all of these things are things that I was, in fact, been predicting in earlier talks that I've given, and I explained it more fully in my book, Doomed to Fail. So I explain why the central banks got that wrong and what they should do instead, a better way forward for both bank regulation and for the management of monetary policy.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. And I kind of really like the fact just what you laid out was really a good fundamental thing. And I think people, and I think your book, it's really, really important people should know about to actually learn what's kind of happening with the world around us and just how a lot of us is taking kind of over and what you can do to be cause and like how you can actually handle certain things. I know like you mentioned before about how businesses are just like, they're affected by certain things and the governments, how they're running and organizational, right? So do you think in terms of businesses, right, that we have in our society today, do you think either by reading the book or do you think by handling things differently, do you think there can be a different outcome in terms of what you were talking about?
Well, one of the things that I write about in the book is the importance of diversity. And by that, I refer to it as true diversity, because diversity in our society today has come to be, it's combined with two other things. It's called diversity, equity, and inclusion. And equity and inclusion are about things which are certainly very important. The fact is that people of color have been underrepresented in businesses and in political life for a very long time. Women have been underrepresented in businesses for a very long time. And that's clearly not inclusive and not fair. And it's quite right that those issues are being dealt with. But that is equity and inclusion. It's not diversity. Diversity is far richer. There are far more aspects of diversity than simply skin color and sex or sexual orientation. It's far richer. And diversity is so important for businesses or any kind of institution, any kind of organization, because only if you have a very diverse organization can you put your business or your institution, give it the best possible way of dealing with a society, an operating environment which is going to adapt and change over time. Right. If the operating environment were immutable, if it never changed, you wouldn't need diversity. In fact, you wouldn't want diversity, because a setup which was, clones perfectly suited to the business environment would be the perfect operating environment, and anything you did to change that would only make it worse. But of course, the operating environment is not immutable. It does change. It adapts. It changes in ways that are completely unforecastable. And so if you have a monoculture within your organization, you're dooming that organization to fail, because you won't be sufficiently agile to adapt when the environment changes. So diversity is incredibly important to give your company, give your institution the best possible chance of being able to be agile and nimble and being able to adapt to face the changing business environment.
So then what do you suggest to people who run businesses that you think would help with, in terms of, creating more of maybe an environment, or more of an organizational, where there's actually some democracy, but also some organization, actual organization in the company? What do you think people should do in terms of people who are CEOs? What should they do to make it more organized?
Yeah, I mean, being a CEO is incredibly difficult. I mean, there's a lot of, I was saying that the future is fundamentally unknowable. Mm-hmm. It's completely unpredictable, and so you need to be continually nimble and agile to changes. Have a diverse organization. Don't think of diversity as being a check the box compliance exercise. Have we got at least 30% of people of color on our board? Have we got at least 30-40% of women on our board? That's just compliance box checking. That's not diversity. Look for real diversity of intellect and experience and thought process of the people that you have. Doesn't mean dumbing down your organization. You don't reduce your threshold, your criteria for the intelligence or the talents of the people that you have. You don't reduce those. You still maintain your high standards for that, but you then look for the most diverse backgrounds of the people that you have, diverse in terms of experience, in terms of things like age and country of origin and life experiences, where people have been educated. By having a diversity of thought is the most important element of diversity. And by encouraging that within your organization from the top to the bottom, that gives your company, your organization, the best possible chance of being able to adapt to an environment which is it's going to change, but the way in which it's going to change, how it's going to do that, is completely unpredictable and unknowable, and you need to be prepared to deal with that. And that's what I'm setting people up. That's what I explain in the book, and explain the underlying mechanisms behind that, which is why it's so important.
Yeah. So I guess my next question, because you're an experienced CEO and you've done a lot of things in being a CEO. What should people do to kind of prepare themselves to watch out for, or because you obviously know what people can run into in terms of being a CEO and founder, and even in tech companies or other companies, right? What do you think people should watch out for in terms of what you mentioned? Because you also mentioned too earlier, how just in terms of the Federal Reserve banking and in the whole banking area, how people have kind of lost faith in that, and how it's kind of it's not really good. It's kind of actually dangerous. How can people, feel safe in that?
Well, I read very widely, and I read from a very diverse set of sources. Unfortunately, increasingly, there's a sorting mechanism of people, both in where they live in the country, on the coast. People. Democrats tend to move in the to towns on the East Coast and on the West Coast. The middle of the country tends to be more Republican. There's this sorting which has gone on, and people increasingly consume news only from the sources that they like. That they go for mainly left wing, center left media, where they source their news from. If they're a Democrat, Republicans tend to source theirs from more right-wing things like Fox News and so on.
Yeah.
I read and absorb information from a very broad array. Deliberately seek out things from the left wing and the right wing as a way of trying to avoid bias in my own opinions. I mean, clearly I got my own political opinions, just like anybody else has. But I try to consume information from a very wide range of sources in order to minimize this effect of bias in the information that I receive, and that's what I would encourage CEOs and everybody to do. take notice of the geopolitical environment in which we operate, which is, I think, is more dangerous today than it's ever been in the course of my career. So be engaged politically, take part in democracy. And one of the most important things people can do is to go out and vote and get engaged in their local town, in their state, in the federal elections. These are important processes. So learn about stuff, read, consume information from a very wide range of sources. Don't narrow that down so that you're just operating in an echo chamber of just people who think just like yourself. Don't do that. Expose yourself as broadly as possible to the widest range of influences and facts and knowledge in order to improve your decision making.
Awesome. Cool. So I guess, and like for you, because I know you obviously you now have a book and I have a second book on the way. And so, you've had a wide range of things that you've done and have accomplished. Could you give me some examples or a story of of some accomplishment that you did that it actually helps, that you feel like you've helped someone in either the company or an organization of any kind, or even with your book? Or
yeah, I mean there are three things which every company needs. Doesn't matter what business it's operating in. It might be a tech business, it might be something else, might be more traditional bricks and mortar kind of business. But every business wants three things. Every business wants to be able to grow revenues. They want to be able to reduce costs, maximize operating leverage to reduce costs, and they want to identify and then mitigate or hedge against risks. And those are the three things that I focus on, and all of the businesses that I work for. I mean, I've been a professional risk manager for 30 years as a trader, and then independent risk oversight function. So the risk identification and hedging against risk or mitigating risk is a more obvious one. But the other two elements of helping the business grow revenues and maximizing operational leverage, organize the business in a way that enables it to reduce costs and be as nimble as it can be on the cost front. Those are the things that I bring to all of the businesses that I work for. But true both when I was an executive working for very large investment banks, and now in terms of the much smaller entrepreneurial, essentially venture capital businesses that I'm engaged in with today.
Nice. Well, awesome. I really appreciate the questions, and I really love talking to you about the AI stuff. I think that was really cool because I'm always fascinated by technology. Like, I'm a very big technology person. Funny, I'll tell you a little quick story is, so my dad has been a computer programmer for 35 years. So he actually worked on Wall Street. He's worked with computers for, since the 80s, so it's like, I kind of get that understanding of what you were talking about, the Wall Street and that whole thing, so it's kind of interesting. And so I've been involved in technology, in terms of, not necessarily aerospace, but more what we deal with AI and computers and phones and whatever. So I kind of appreciate that more in terms of what you were talking about. So that's very cool. And then, as you mentioned before, it's also a very interesting time because politically, it's there's a lot of things going on, with economics and just, I don't want to get too involved in it, but there's just a lot of stuff that is going on that, people have their own ideologies. And like you mentioned before, people are stuck with one instead of looking at both ends of how can I actually, make the right decisions for something, and everyone should vote early, So anyways, I really appreciate the time that you've given us and given me just answering the questions I had here. So I guess before we end off here, is there a place where people can reach out to you and find out a little bit more about you or your book?
Yeah, the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. There are a couple of other people called Paul Shotton, which I discovered myself. But if you look for me on LinkedIn, you'll find me in terms of my background. The business that I list myself as being the major focus of my time now as a CEO of a company called Biosurfactants. But the other businesses that I'm engaged in are also are shown there, as is my interest in writing and so on. So look me up on LinkedIn, reach out. I'll be very happy to connect with you. and asked for appearing on this program now. The pleasure's been mine, Josh. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, it was such a great conversation. I really appreciate the time you took. We actually did this episode, and it was kind of like an amazing time that I actually had just getting to know you and just learning about yourself. So I really appreciate the time. And of course, I thank everyone here too for listening. And if you guys are liking this stuff, please like and subscribe. And of course, we thank Paul for joining the show. And if you guys like more stuff like this, and definitely reach out to me. And if you want to also be on podcast or want to join our masterclass about how to be a guest speaker, you can definitely do that. All right. Well, Paul, thank you very much for joining us, and I will see you next time. All right, Paul.